that the governor's proposal says for misdemeanors and nonviolent offenses. There are advocacy groups that just say money bail. I think if you just say money bail, it's actually can be flexible. It can be interpreted different ways. So if you say just misdemeanor and nonviolent felonies, that is definitely limiting it, where this way allows consideration of a broader application of that. There are some concerns about other categories of felonies and the statutory definition of a violent crime. There are actually some very minor things that fall under that, if I'm correct.
There are potentially minor offenses that could fall under the preventive detention component of the legislation.
So anyway, these letters, they're just, if you're comfortable with signing them, if you're not comfortable, don't sign them.
This is kind of a two-part question, but do you feel like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is fairly accurate about the buildup of the prison industry? So are we then the voice to counter whatever voice the politicians are hearing in their ear about from the people that stand to, not that there's necessarily a conspiracy theory, but there are people, you mentioned how much money's being made, somebody's making money, employing people, etc. So we have to be the voice that counters what might be the only voice the politicians are hearing going, we gotta keep this prison in our county, we gotta. So we're just kind of countering that growth of the prison industry if we can get our voices out there?
Yes, I think the Michelle Alexander's book and the documentary The 13th actually set out the history of the war on crime and its disproportionate impact on people of color. But absolutely, your voices are vital in order to sort of push back against that prison industrial complex that does exist. You mentioned it yourself that every time we want to try to close a prison, the communities that were in those prisons are located, you're talking about losing jobs and income to those communities, and that's just a small part of the prison industrial complex. Certainly, bail bondsman's one, private prisons are another. And I don't know if you haven't had a chance to see this 13th, please see it. It's actually very good. How much money private prisons generate for governments, and how much for big business as well. By the way, businesses actually will hire prisoners, or I shouldn't say hire prisoners directly. They will contract with these private prisons for them to work, building things on cheap labor. They become modern slaves, and they get a very little amount. I don't know what the average was. 25 cents an hour, 28 cents an hour. That's what prisoners are paid in order to work. And so it's an outrage, but that's just one component of this industrial complex that's existed. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but yeah, you're vital to pushing back on that and calling up your legislators and saying, this is a system is wrong and we need to fix it.
Actually, just to tie in real quick to the character issue, if I can, because character is used as like a guideline for judges and officers when they're like, are we going to set bail? What's a person's character? Well, the interesting thing is, and having been a veteran of the war on drugs, remember, like Nancy Reagan, just say no, right? Drug addiction was a crime issue, something that we just chose to do or chose not to do. Hopefully one of the things that's happened since that is we didn't see that, or we found out that it's not a character issue. Addiction is a disease. It's not something people choose to do. When I was a supervisor in the police world, sometimes I'd run against, especially young officers who would start to like dislike the people they were arresting. And, I can understand this, and like drug addicts. But I would always say to officers, look at the life they lead. Right? You're always running from the police. You're always wondering where your next high is. I mean, they tend to be like, they don't take care of themselves. They have no future. I mean, who chooses that? drug addiction is not a choice. All right, we'll get past that. But one of the things that I think what got us to the point where we are is with Michelle Alexander, the war on drugs and how that worked, is we viewed it as a character issue. So if I have somebody in custody and like, well, they're a drug addict, well, they're not a good person. You see? So we have to set bail because that's one of the that's one of the criteria. They're not a good person. So instead of looking at it as, well, you know what, this is a sick person that needs medical attention, right? They're a bad person, so we're going to set bail.
I don't want to stop you. But thank you all so much for joining us and participating. We know that we join you in being so grateful for our excellent presenters, Iman Abid, Tim Donaher, Precious Bedell, and Gary Putta. We thank our co-sponsors, and we thank Asbury as always. You'll find information about the League of Women Voters on your way out, along with some of the other sponsoring organizations. Please be sure we have your email address. We'd like to follow up. And our next forum involves, what's her first name? Sally Resch Wagner, who is a chronicler of early women's suffrage activities and is the curator and director of the Jocelyn Matilda Gage House in Syracuse. We thank you so much. That's March 19th. Good luck with your advocacy.